Shalom. Good morning, everyone. Ariel Tzadok here from the KosherTorah School, found online at www.koshertorah.com, bringing you today's daily Sefer Yetzirah lesson, lesson number 15 in our series, dedicated, of course, to the safety, health, and well-being of all those today being faced with the trials and tribulations of the present virus situation in our world. But now, we hope and pray that actually the material that we're learning here in the Sefer Yetzirah, which remember, is actually a book of healing. Yeah, you could actually call it a book of spiritual medicine. But a point that we make over and over again with regards to that is to remember we're not dealing with superstition or hocus pocus magic. We are dealing with an actual and a viable technology. Sefer Yetzirah can realistically, validly be called a creation science. Because when one properly understands the nature of the Sephirot Belima as that underlying energy, and we've learned to experience it, interact with it, we can then learn how to properly and practically use it. And using it doesn't create new stuff, but teaches us how to take the, in quotes, stuff that's there and form it or reform it to make that, model that which we want to, if you will, create or build in this world. This is why it's not called a Sefer Biri'ah, creation. Creation, as we've learned before, that comes from God. Formation, Yetzirah, is that which we ourselves can do. The difference, of course, again, God creates from something that we can't imagine. We form from that which we can imagine. Now, this gets into the understanding of what we need to direct ourselves today. In Mishnah 4, we began in our previous class, and we had these very curious words, Havin b'Hokhma v'Hacham b'Binah, which means understand with wisdom and be wise with understanding. Now, Rabbi Haim goes in his commentary and describes how this is associated with certain things which we call in Kabbalah Partzufim, or Sefirotic Faces. This type of Lurianic Chaim Vital teachings, of course, I cover in great detail in the Otzot Hayim classes and other Kitvei Ha'ari classes that teach this form of Chaim Vital's vocabulary and concepts. Go to my course page, KosherTorah.com. You'll see those courses if you're interested in a greater in-depth understanding of the Torah to the Ari. Those are the courses you take. That page, my course page, is where you go. But now, let's have just a little bit of an intro. What is Rabbi Haim dealing with when he introduces to us here these Partzufim? Well, let's mention them by name. As we have already learned, there is that dual function of the mind, Hokhma and Binah, the two Sephirot of wisdom and understanding, which again, we refer to as the intuitive function of the mind, Hokhma, and the academic intellectual function of the mind, Binah. Fine, all well and good. We understand human psychology. Yawn, now what? So Reb Haim says that with regards to experiencing the Sephirot, gazing upon the Sephirot, there is that which we call a Sefirotic face. A face, again, is a Partzuf. It's an Aramaic word from the Zohar. What is a mask? It also can mean a mask. So when we approach an experience of the divine, again, we have to dispel this mythology that we think God is like a little old man with a white beard sitting on a throne somewhere up in heaven, and you go off into a mystical, vision or whatever else, and you walk through the light, and all of a sudden, there you are in front of this throne. There's this big guy on the throne saying, "How are you doing?" I mean, this is childhood fantasy. Now, there are many people today who have had things called out of body experiences. I've seen rabbis who've had these, and they go on and make these big long videos on YouTube, and they say, I've been to heaven, and I've seen this, and I've seen that, and you know something? They honestly believe this to be true without understanding their own internal psychology, which is a shame. Because you know something, you have members of other faiths who also have the similar out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences. And guess what? Protestants who have this type of experience, they go up to heaven and they see a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus Christ. And you can say, that's kind of weird. Well, it's not weird that a Protestant would see Jesus, but you would think that they would see, if there was an historical Jesus, they would see the historical Yeshu HaNotzri, who was a dark-skinned, black-haired, Jewish individual. But no, they see a blonde-haired, blue-eyed. They're seeing the projection of their imagination. Catholics have an experience, always usually, of what they consider to be the Holy Virgin Mary. So how come Protestants don't see the Virgin Mary? All right? How come Jews only see this? Because when you're dealing with the processes of the mind, out of body or near-death experiences, you experience something which we call the lower Garden of Eden. Even Rabbi Moshe de Leon, in his writing, speaks about this in depth, as well as many of the other Holy Kabbalists. It is a projection of what the individual mind expects to see. So this supposed rabbi who's having his near-death experiences and he sees all this stuff in heaven, all it is a projection of his own mind. And he is incapable of recognizing that because he can't see outside of his own mind because his consciousness is limited to his mind. Well, consciousness, remember, intuition, intellect, those are the frameworks and boundaries of consciousness. And there's a small level, and then there's higher levels. So when we refer to these smaller and higher levels of consciousness, Rabbi Chaim Vital, in his Lurianic system here, gives them different names, or if you will, masks, to help describe them within our experience. So, think of it like this, if you will. In intellect, you have higher and lower. In intuition, you have higher and lower. All right, that makes sense, doesn't it? I hope so. Now, we always refer to intellect as the small brain, as opposed to intuition being the big brain. So in Hebrew, the intellect, which is the Sefirat Binah, is called Katnut, smallness. And intuition, which is Hokhma, is called Gadlut. Now, for those of you who study the mystical meditations of these things, especially at this time of Passover, you have small and big, Katnut, Gadlut, and two levels of each. Remember we just said, right? So you have lower level of Katnut, higher level of Katnut. Smaller level of Gadlut, higher level of Gadlut. And of course, small level versus big level is always given numbers as the first level, second level. And with Katnut, therefore you have Katnut Rishon and Katnut Sheni. And with Gadlut, you have Gadlut Rishon, Gadlut Sheni. Now, especially with the meditations of the Passover Seder, we're always focusing on these four levels of mochin, is what they're called, Sefirotic brains or elevation in consciousness. You're interested more in that? Go get my ebook on the cycles of the year, the subjects of Passover. I translate the whole material there and teach you how to use it. But getting back to this, because this is all revolving around the same process. And this is not academic. This is not just some boring thing. This is how we form reality. Let's put it into practical context. You want to change the world. How are you going to do it? Well, you are A, not the President of the United States. You are not a world leader. You are not the richest, wealthiest individual in the world. Maybe you are listening. I don't know who's going to listen to the video. But it's not like you could just pick up the phone and call the heads of Asia and Europe, Africa, and the Americas and say, okay, I want this change done. It doesn't happen like it's not for me. All right? So how do we change the world? I, as an individual, certainly do not have any power to change the external world. But what I can try to influence is the internal world. So how do I do that? Well, first I have to get my head in order. I have to think properly. I have to feel properly. I have to then act properly. So it all begins with thinking. Now, one of the meditative processes in our system we call hit bo nenu. Now, I admit, I'm going a little outside of Rabbi Chaim Vital's commentary here and going into my prophetic system, which I have the entire prophetic Kabbalistic meditation course of Sefer Yetzirah, 40 hours, if anyone's interested, to explain this material. Because in order to make it real, I got to tell you what it's like. We have all of these Partzufim, okay? In Hokhma, you have two Partzufim. Abba, Father, and below it, you have a level called Yisrael Saba. Remember we said you had that Gadlut, first level, second level? Okay, these are the names. And in Imma, Intellect, Binah, you have two Partzufim called Imma and Tevunah. So you have four Partzufim. On the Imma side, Imma and Tevunah. On the Abba side, Abba and Yisrael Saba. Don't get confused with all these names. It's really simple. Because remember, these are names to symbolize levels of our grasp or understanding of things. So it also has very much to do with what we understand in psychology as introversion and extroversion, if you will, looking out, looking in. So let's associate these in, quote, higher and lower levels of intellect and intuition with extroversion and introversion. Level 1, the lower level, always looking out to the world. Higher level, looking in. So when we talk about the Sephirot, let's apply it. Okay, we have the Sefirotic Binah, which is the intellect of the mind. Well, how does our intellect work? Well, it's something we all know. Part of our intellect looks to the outside world to try to understand it. Part of our intellect, if you will, turns inside to try to understand what's going on inside. Part of it looks outside in an extroverted way. Part of it looks inside in an introverted way. I hope this is understandable to everybody because we all experience this at every moment. Here, if I want to say to you, all right, let's go change the tire of the car. Okay, well, I got to know how to do that. I have to know what a tire is. I have to know what a jack is. I have to know what a pump is, etc. But now, if I want to understand actually what a tire is, how does air fill it? No, these are internal concepts I have to think about. Internal, external. You get the idea. This is with Binah. So when we are applying the external form of thought, we call that the first level of intellect. All right? Katnut, Rishon. And that we give the Sefirotic Partzuf name Tevunah, which means, kind of like grasping intellect or understanding or intelligence. But in order for intellect to really get deeper, you really need to think internally. That's an elevation of the intellectual process, or an internalization of the intellectual process, bringing us into a deeper state of intellect called the higher state. Remember, intellect is always called Katnut. This is the second level of intellect internal. That's called Katnut Sheni. We give it the name Imma. So you go from Tevunah to Imma, from Katnut Rishon to Katnut Sheni. Practical, you go from externally understanding the world to introvertedly contemplating it within. In the prophetic tradition, we call this hitbonenut, contemplation. Well, guess where this type of contemplation leads one? It leads you into that eureka moment of intuitive understanding. The first level of intuitive understanding usually takes the form in the mind of correlations to external things. It's kind of like a low level of intuition. Well, intuition already is not the left column of the intellect, it's the right column. Remember we said Sefirotic Hokhma? Well, that lower level of that intuitive experience, we give it a name. Remember we called Gadlut, because intuition is always called greatness or Gadlut. So the first lower level, Gadlut Rishon, we give it the name Yisrael Saba, Grandpa Israel. And eventually we think deeper and deeper, go more into the abstract levels of higher consciousness to the deeper levels of intuition, and that's called Gadlut Sheni. Second level, we give it the name Abba. So there we have 4 Partzufim, corresponding to 4 mochin, corresponding to a practical, realistic practice of intellectual, intuitive unity. So, we just discussed, let me throw in all the Kabbalah speak now, Katnut Rishon, Katnut Sheni, Gadlut Rishon, Gadlut Sheni. All that fancy language. Go to the Passover lessons if you want more of that. We discussed and described this with regards to the Sefirotic masks, the Partzufim, Yisrael Saba and Abba, Imma and Tevunah. And we describe now how it all works. And now we can understand what the Sefer Yetzirah is teaching us. Hevin b'Hokhma v'Hacham v'Binah. Inside Binah, intellect, you have again Rishon level, Sheni level. So therefore, we begin the process of intellect. What is it that I want to accomplish? What is it that I want to understand? So, like Rodin's thinker, I got to sit there and go, all right, what am I going to do with this? What's the best way to handle this? What's the right way to accomplish my goal? You're going to sit there and stroke your beard, whether you have one or not. And you're going to think, and you're going to think. Eventually, you're going to close your eyes. You're going to go deep into thought. You don't know what deep thought's all about. It's not just a computer from, the Hitchhiker's Guide. It's something inside us. You are therefore making the transition from Katnut Rishon to Katnut Sheni. You are practicing the form called hitbonenut, where you're going into deep thought. You're becoming from extroverted, thinking about outside, introverting with inside. You understand this concept because you probably are doing it every day. And now, this again is what we call hevin b'Hokhma, understanding with wisdom. Understanding with wisdom means you're going inside, introverting, experiencing the process within your mind. And this is going to lead you to that eureka moment. I got this brilliant thought that just popped into my head. And what form does that brilliant thought take? Is it going to teach you the secrets of world peace? Is it going to teach you how the Messiah is going to come? How we're going to elevate global consciousness and all the rest? Well, maybe not so grandiose, but it will give you some profound insight. And as you go into your intuition, if you can go deeper into it and deeper with proper meditative training, you can receive communication from your Magid higher self, from Malachim. You can come in contact with the Sarafei Teli or whoever or whatever else is there at that deeper intuitive level. That is the telepathic communications in the mind. And then that has to be sifted into a form that the mind can imaginatively understand. This is the whole secret of prophecy. And of course, Ruach HaKodesh and the meditative experience. This is I write about this in all my books and all the courses. Go online, check it all out. It's all there. And then you need the process to translate this from one side to the next, meaning from intuition to intellect. And that is why it says, Hokhma v'Binah. Be wise now with understanding. So, I ran out of time. We'll continue this in our next class. But I want to then conclude about understanding the oscillation process. Again, we discussed this in our previous class, and we'll have to go into it again some more in our next class, where in which the process of mind and thinking goes back and forth between this intellectual, intuitive, intellectual, until we grasp that which, again, like we said last time, dot, and where that leads to. We'll pick up on that note, God be willing, in our next class. Okay, guys. I'll talk to you all soon. Stay safe, stay healthy. Check out our courses, which we have available for you. If you don't take advantage of them for yourselves, don't blame me that you don't accomplish it. Ariel Bar Tzadok, KosherTorah School. See you all soon.